Hello and welcome to the weekly commodity market update. I'm Brownfield's Will Robinson, joined as always by the University of Missouri's Ben Brown, but this time we get Ben at home.
That's
So,
right. This has been at home. I'm waiting on a dryer repairman today.
all fun things, we were just talking a second ago, and I think, Ben, yeah, it's time to get a clothesline in the.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
It's working. I don't know what's wrong with it. It's working, but it's not drying. Like the heat's not coming out. So
So it's a fancy spin cycle,
that's right. That's right.
So speaking of spin cycles, what adjustments I guess are we seeing in the markets this week?
That's actually a good segue, Will, right there. So we had kind of a mixed week and a lot of it in the spreads here. So old crop corn for March down 4 cents to 6.76. New crop corn up 7 cents to 5.95. Old crop soybeans down 4 to 15.26. November soybeans up 8 cents to 13.70. Sorry about that. Soybean oil was down a penny. Soybean meal was up $2.20 per short ton. Old crop wheat was up 6 cents to 7.49. New crop wheat was up 11 cents to 7.65. And then that West Texas Intermediate crude oil was down just over $2 per barrel to trade right at $75.50 per barrel.
So really a lot of mixed expectations, mixed movement this week. Really, what's a lot of that been on? As we kind of get ready for the WASD tomorrow.
Absolutely. So some of this is conditions in South America impacting, the old crop sales that we have, and then the expectation for new crop sales being a little bit more positive. Some of it's also demand. So we'll touch on a couple of those factors here real quick. Domestic gasoline demand climbed the entire month of January after falling hard in December. However, the increasing domestic demand is not enough to offset total supply for stocks and energy as it increased crude oil 174 million gallons, gasoline 108 million gallons, and distillate fuels 97 million gallons. That translates a little bit into the ethanol market. Ethanol production increased on the week to trade or to finish above 300 million gallons for the first time in nearly 2 months. Ethanol stocks decreased on higher disappearance, offsetting increased production. The Federal Reserve approved a quarter-point interest rate last week, bringing that federal benchmark up to 4.5 to 4.75, but also signaled plans to raise rates again next month. Agriculture export sales last week were mixed. Corn exceeded all expectations and had the most impressive week of sales of all, while wheat really disappointed. However, that was exactly flipped when we got to export inspections. So physical exports out of the country, corn exports declined for the third straight week. It was the fourth week in a row that weekly soybean exports exceeded 67 million bushels. And then comparable to soybeans, wheat also had a strong week, exceeding all expectations and the largest inspections volume in nearly 7 months.
So still some, I guess, struggles on the trade front. Some maybe silver linings, but kind of mostly still on the downside there overall. Looking forward, we got some recent reports out, some private estimates out of South America that you kind of touched on there for some production. Really, before we step into the WASD that's coming out a little bit later this week, what have those been like? What is the market's reaction there?
Yeah, let's start on the good. Let's start with the positive increases or the positive production in Brazil. So the U.S. Aduche in Brazil's capital, for 2022 and 2023 corn production, which is the crop that's coming out of the ground right now on that first crop, but also this represents the plantings of those second crop. They had it pegged at 125.5 million metric tons over 22.5 million hectares. That production estimate is up 500,000 metric tons relative to the estimate there in January that came out. So that equates to about 20 million bushels of corn. Wheat production of 9.6 million metric tons was also slightly up from the January estimate. Private estimates have shown a rise in expectations for Brazilian corn and soybean production, both on added area and favorable growing conditions. So that's the positive. If we look at some of the other private estimates out of Brazil, StoneX last week raised their soybean production estimate to 154.2 million metric tons. That was up from 153.8, so just 0.4 of a metric ton there. But if realized, that would set a new production record for Brazil and represents a 19% year-over-year increase for the country. For corn, StoneX increased their production estimate to 129.9 million metric tons in Brazil. That was up as well from January by a little over 1 million metric ton, or 125. Excuse me. That exceeds USDA's estimate of 125 million metric tons by 4.5 million metric tons. So that would also represent an all-time production record. So positive, I think, news out of Brazil for Brazilian producers, and the fact that they've got a really good crop. Conversely, dry weather and high temperatures have really damaged that crop in Argentina for the 22-23 marketing year, especially soybeans. The U.S. attaché in Argentina lowered that country's soybean production estimate to 36 million metric tons. That was down 9.5 million metric tons from the January estimate. So as we look ahead, that equates to roughly 350 million bushels of soybeans. That's big enough that I anticipate that we'll see some pretty sizable revisions tomorrow in the USDA reports.
Yeah, so a lot of things to really digest there. So positive news for Brazilian growers, so some positive expectations, maybe some record crops coming out of that region there. But again, you talked about the continued dryness in Argentina. So a lot of maybe some mixed action for South America overall. What does that mean for the export market and for the global market from the United States perspective?
Sure. So, I mean, this is where I don't think Argentina is going to let their soybean crush industry, just hang out to dry. We've seen in the past when Argentina's had dryness that they've pulled in soybeans from Brazil, and it certainly looks like, their deficit that they're going to have in production might be somewhat made up from a increased production in Brazil. Those beans flow south to Argentina, and then that kind of fills those crush facilities. So, if we think about the soybean product categories, I'm not really sure that this has all that much of a change in U.S. export potential for like soybean meal and soybean oil. It is a factor I'm watching. If the U.S. starts selling large shipments of soybean meal, then that signals to me that there could be some challenges in the Argentina soybean meal market. But in the physical commodities, we've got a long ways to go on corn. That second crop corn, which represents 75%, hasn't even been planted yet. So we got a long ways to go on corn to see what that market's look like. But at least on the soybean side, I think we're going to have some competition on the soybean side. It's just been late, and so that's extended our U.S. soybean export window and provided us some sizable sales. As I mentioned, this is the fourth straight week that soybean sales have exceeded 65 million bushels, and that's really unique for this time of year for us.
So really looking at those expectations, a lot of strong expectations, like you said, again, for Brazil. How does that, I guess, flow into USDA's global supply and demand estimates that's getting ready to come out this week? How in line do you expect maybe these numbers to be in with USDA's reports to come?
Yeah, so we've seen the U.S. and private estimates really whack Argentina production. Tomorrow's expectations for the trade are on Argentine corn. The average guess is just down basically 3.5 million metric tons. So from 9.5 down to 3.5 is kind of the gap that we're working with. But the average estimated range for Argentina corn is 7.5 million metric tons. So it's a pretty big range that we could fall in. The trade expectations kind of follow. But certainly, I think as we look at South America, the estimates and the market is anticipating reductions in both Argentina and corn and soybeans, while increases across the board for Brazilian corn and Brazilian soybeans. So those are some of the changes we'll be watching. How aggressive does USDA get in those Argentina crops? When we've seen private estimates and even our own USDA attaché in Brazil, in Argentina, signal deterioration in that crop. How aggressive do they get tomorrow?
Well, and it seems like, maybe not one of the biggest reports of the year, but somewhat of a key report still when you're looking at those estimates when it comes to South America, obviously a key trading competitor there. But, looking locally to the U.S., still extremely early. It's only February. So, how can you really make any sizable adjustments there for a crop that isn't even in the ground yet? But still looking at dryness, a lot of dryness, that soil hasn't been recharged too much from a lot of snowfall yet. So there's still a lot of wiggle room when you look at what's to come on the South American side, but then early expectations on the U.S. side.
Yeah, so I mean, I'll just make one clarification there, Will. I think February is a key month for Argentina production and Brazilian soybean production. I think this is a key month for those reports. We're getting pretty close to getting, accurate estimates. It's maybe early for that corn crop, that second corn crop that we're talking about. So I think for Argentina, yeah, this is the month where we tend to see USDA make those revisions to Argentina production. Just because we're far enough along that growing season. So,
do you have any personal expectations?
Yeah, I do actually. So, I think the reductions across the board in Argentina for both crops are going to exceed 3 million metric tons, both for corn and soybeans. I look for corn to be a little bit larger than the soybean reduction, but somewhere in that let's just say 3 million metric ton to 6 million metric ton revision on the corn side, and then maybe a more modest 3.5 million metric ton revision on the Argentine soybean side. So that's what I'm anticipating tomorrow as we look ahead. I would not be surprised if USDA left the Brazilian crop alone, just because it is large. We know it's large. If anything, maybe a 500,000 metric ton increase in the Brazilian crop. However, that's going to tighten, the global balance sheets for corn and soybeans, especially on the corn side where we're very tight. Soybeans is very tight too, but global feed grains remain very tight. So I think those are my expectations on the global side. Domestically, I look for U.S. ending stocks to increase across the board for all three categories on weaker demand. We saw USDA, whack soybean exports in January. I look for them to increase soybean exports again this month. And then on the corn side, reducing corn exports and corn used for ethanol, as both of those have just lagged as we've worked our way through the winter months.
Yeah, so really just putting that into a simple kind of little synopsis there. Potential Argentina's losses might outpace Brazil's potential gains.
Yes, that would be a good caption. So I had to think about that, but yes, that is correct.
All right. So looking elsewhere throughout the week, what else should farmers and ranchers really be paying attention to as any potential market movers?
Yeah. So the big one this week is going to be the USDA reports, specifically related to South America production and then U.S. demand. Those come out on Tuesday of this week, and then the rest of the week is pretty straightforward with our normal reports following their normal schedule.
All right. Well, Ben, it's always a pleasure. Viewers, listeners, if you'd like to learn more about what we do or our sister program, the weekly livestock market update, you can do so at brownfieldagnews.com. It's always a pleasure again, Ben. Thank you for hanging out with me this morning. I'm Will Robinson on Brownfield.